The meeting is now being recorded. Welcome everyone to Know Your Audience, the Rest Will Follow. Today's webinar, April 19th, 2016. A deeper dive into audience assessment. It's my pleasure now to introduce today's presenters. Let me start with Rachel Bauer. Rachel, please introduce yourself and then tell us about your colleagues joining you today.
Thanks so much, Mike. I'm thrilled to be here as always. This has been a great series of webinars. We're on our third in this sustainability series. I'm Rachel Bauer, the PI of ATE Central, and here with me is Nancy Marin from Blue Sky to Blueprint. Nancy, do you want to just say a quick hello to everyone?
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today.
We also have some very special guests who are going to talk a little bit more about their programs in just a minute. We have Marilyn Barger. Marilyn, do you want to just say hello? I'm not hearing Marilyn.
No, we're not either. We're still working with her in the background on finalizing her audio system, so she'll come back on. She'll be ready when we come to her, Rachel.
Fabulous. Okay, and Tom, would you like to say a quick hello also?
I'll make sure you unmute.
Yes.
There you go. Okay, there you are.
Yeah, thanks so much. And good afternoon or good morning, I suppose, depending on your time zone. I'm delighted to be here and looking forward to participating in the webinar.
All right, great. So one of the things that we always like to do at the beginning of these webinars is hear a little bit about who we have joining us today. So we're going to start with a first poll. It just came up here. Just tell us a little bit about how you describe yourself. We often have folks from both TACT and ATE, which it looks like is the case today. And if you've classed yourself as other, if you want to, it's a good time to practice in that chat window and just tell us where you're coming from or a little bit about you in the chat window. So just another few seconds here. If anybody would like to tell us about themselves in the chat window, that would be great. Okay, so as usual, Nancy, a high level of folks from ATE, but some folks from TACT too, and a few other. Somebody said that they're a contractor, nonprofit, an evaluator.
Fantastic. The more the merrier. I would say one of the things we're going to look at today is, the difference between our primary audience and other audiences, and, our ATE project and center leaders are really the reason we created this series, but how great is it that others are also finding this useful? So thrilled to see people here today.
Absolutely. Okay, Mike, I think that was great. Thanks for closing that up.
So I can just get us started by giving a quick outline, and then I'll step back and I'll let you learn a little bit more about the people that you'll be hearing from today. But essentially the goals of today's webinar are to allow us to dig in a little bit more to the idea that we've talked about over the last couple of webinars, just how important understanding your audience and your stakeholders is to anything you're going to consider as a sustainability and a long-range plan. So today, we hope we'll be encouraging participants to see audience and stakeholders as really, really central to building out a sustainability plan. We're going to offer you a framework that you can use to think about this in somewhat of a systematic way. And here's the real fun part. We have fantastic PIs with us today on the line who are going to be able to share examples of how this laser focus on their audience and users and stakeholders has really helped them to become quite successful at what they do. So we'll be hearing at some length from Marilyn, who represents the Fleet Project, and Tom representing Vesta. Now, right now, I get to step backwards again and let you know that we'll do introductions first, a section on the role of audiences in sustainability. So this is where I will get on my soapbox. And we'll do a section on what do you know about your audience, what are the types of things you do know or could know, and then some tips on ways to consider learning a little bit more and why we think that's a good idea. So on with the introductions. First we'll hear from Rachel, who will remind us why we are all gathered here today. Rachel.
Thanks so much, Nancy. most of you are very familiar with ATE, but just to briefly remind everyone, ATE, Advanced Technological Education, is a National Science Foundation funding stream, and it's really focused on educating technicians for those high-tech fields that help support and drive the nation's economy. It's one of NSF's only programs that really puts community colleges in a leadership role, and it's a really critical part of the ATE program that community colleges are really leading the projects and centers. There's a big focus on industry partnerships, working with economic development agencies, as well as secondary schools and four-year institutions. And that pathway, the progression through the different institutions is also really a key part of the program. AT Central is in fact a project funded under ATE. Our primary purpose is really to amplify the impact of the work that the AT projects and centers are doing. We have an information hub and portal, a resource collection of the wonderful materials that are developed by grantees, and we create a series of services and tools that are very responsive to the needs of the community, and we also help support outreach and dissemination. One of the things that has come out of this community-driven responsiveness is this set of sustainability support services. We did a survey of the AT community in 2011, and sustainability was really a top need for folks. They really felt like they needed to know more about how to work on this. They wanted to understand more about the expectations from NSF. And so we partnered with Nancy, who will tell you a little bit more about her own background in just a second, to offer this set of webinars, and actually we've been doing workshops also. So to begin with, I'm going to turn this over to someone who's had
didn't get out of the test thing yet.
Experience with sustainability. Marilyn, are you is your mic working well enough, or should we skip over to Tom? Maybe we should.
Marilyn, well, we heard. Let's just do one thing. Marilyn, we heard you just a moment ago.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Am I okay?
Yeah, you sound fine.
You're great, Marilyn. Go ahead. So tell us a little bit about FLATE.
Okay, so thanks for your patience, everyone. FLATE's a regional center, a regional ATE center focused on manufacturing and engineering technology education in the state of Florida. And our mission is just to make those graduates of those programs the best they can be for our industry in the state. Next slide.
Marilyn, you know, we're getting a fair amount of background noise from your audio.
I'm on my headset.
Okay.
That sounds a little bit better.
Go ahead then, Marilyn. I'm sorry to interrupt you. Go ahead.
Okay. So we do that through what we call a collaborative lifestyle, and engaging all of our partners and stakeholders in a lot of different categories or areas. And if you wanted to pigeonhole them into particular types, you'll see some of those on this slide as well. So part of the talk today is about our audiences and our stakeholders, which is the term we use, stakeholders, for the people we engage to make the best manufacturing education technicians in Florida. All right.
Thanks so much, Marilyn. We'll hear more from Marilyn throughout the webinar, but we're going to turn it over to Tom, who's going to talk to us a little bit about VESTA next.
Well, thank you much, and again, hello everyone. So VESTA is a National Center of Excellence. VESTA is an acronym, stands for Viticulture and Enology Science and Technology Alliance. And VESTA is focused on online wine and grape education. Started back in 2004 as a ATE project, moved from there to a regional center, which is when Michigan State University, who I represent, got involved, and now we are just starting our second round of funding as a national center and have a fairly large footprint across the country working with a variety of institutions as well as the industry. This slide is pretty busy, but just wanted to point out a couple of things related to the VESTA program. It is comprehensive education. We have 41 online courses hosted by one of 7 partner institutions. So not all of us that are part of VESTA actually host courses, but we do have 7 of those partners, and we have about 21 educational partners that are involved with VESTA. It's changing a little bit because, again, we're just starting our second round of funding as a national center. The faculty is from around the country, and an interesting piece of it is that you could be a community college in Illinois, and if you're hosting a VESTA course, the faculty member may be residing in California and delivering it through your institution. A quick example of my own, I'm, again, a full-time employee at Michigan State. I teach one course for VESTA, and it actually is going to be hosted by Kent State Ashtabula, and they will actually hire me to do that. We have 3 educational tracks: viticulture, which is the growing of grapes; we have enology, which is making of wine; and we just added an entrepreneurship track, which I'll talk more about later. So let me stop there, and then we can continue to move on. And if there are questions, we can go. And yes, go Spartans. Thank you, Carol.
Thank you, Tom, and I can't wait for you to share some of the details of what you've done as we go along, and of course Marilyn as well. So I represent Epica, which is a not-for-profit organization. You may have heard of JSTOR, which is a fairly large collection of digitized content, scholarly articles, books, primary sources, originally created with help from the Mellon Foundation about 15, 16 years ago. For years, I worked with Epica SNR, which is a research and consulting group, and it was really with them that I was able to get involved in some of this work. We did a lot of research, reports, case studies that formed the basis of our understanding as an organization, which led us to Rachel. I'll point people to some of the materials that we have available, that Epica has available, including reports on sustainability and on what the key steps in sustainability are. Don't let the word digital throw you too much here. A lot of the key steps that we'll talk about today are extremely transferable and have to do with any real new initiative that you're undertaking. So this particular report that I'm showing includes a lot of case studies you might be interested in. Full disclosure, though, I am no longer with Epica, although I'm still working on this project and with Rachel. I now have my own little shop called Blue Sky to Blueprint, which offers strategy, consulting, research, and training really in the same terrain. You know what? Sustainability doesn't seem to be going out of style. It seems like this is actually still a very, very lively question for funders and for grantees, and that's what I'm focusing on. So the role for the audience when we talk about sustainability plans, you know, when we kick off each of these new categories or each of these new sections of the presentation, we're going to start off with a little food for thought. So Rachel, can you tee up our poll question?
All right, so one of the things we want to find out is, you know, for when you're thinking about sustainability, what's the thing that feels like the most important issue for you? For many of us, identifying those reliable funding sources is high. I see that that's resonating, but also understanding the students and faculty, deepening ties to your institution, and depositing materials that you've developed into AT Central or whatever centralized archive you may have for your materials. If you're TAC, that would probably be Merlot. Okay, give you a minute or two, and if you put other, you're welcome to write that in the chat box, although most people seem to be falling into those first few areas.
You know, and I would, this is of course a trick question in a way, right? This is, there's nothing here that's unimportant. Everything is extremely important that you've all indicated. I am curious to hear what other is, so maybe someone will type in what that write-in response is. So one of the things, you know, for certain projects, if you work on something and it's a completed end product or output or something that's easy to deposit, whether it's curriculum or articles or anything else, deposit might be a viable end of the road and exit strategy, and there's really nothing wrong with that. Some of these other things, though, are really going to be critical in terms of keeping your operation ongoing and healthy and growing. So I'm not at all surprised to see funding sources really top the list, but it's also nice to see that the understanding of students and faculty, is tied with that. Not, of course, that my prejudice from the title of this webinar hasn't been made clear. I think what I'd like to spend some time sharing with you today is how that understanding of students really is going to help you unlock not just great metrics for impact, but possibly also funding sources.
All right. Well, I think we have some answers here to our poll, and a couple people did put in chat. Deidre said that it was managing program income, and Michael said that it was meeting the needs of the folks that they serve, who could be seen as stakeholders or audiences for sure.
Yeah, and that's a great point. And one of the things that I'm learning as I work with this funding stream in particular is that people have different ways of expressing it. In some versions of this talk in the past, I might have used the word user or end user. In other cases, people understand this as their audience. Marilyn, when she thinks about it, uses the word stakeholder. But in any case, Michael, thank you for writing this in. It's really meeting the needs of the people we serve. And maybe the operative word here is people. There are actually people that we're in this for. Who are they and how can we help them? So this is my way of walking us through just where this audience idea fits in the whole grand sustainability scheme. So I like to back up by saying when you're first writing a proposal for something, I'm sure to all of us it just seems like a great idea, which it is. It becomes an even greater idea when we start to factor in some of the external pressures that are going to work upon that. For example, what does my audience, what do my users need? And also, what else is out there? What does that environment look like that I'm functioning in? Are there things I need to know about that are going to shape what I'm offering so I'm not duplicating something and that I'm really creating something unique for those stakeholders? Once that's taken into account, you don't just have a good idea, you actually have a value proposition. We're not going to talk about value proposition in a lot of depth today, but it really underlies this whole webinar. Because if you understand who your users are and what they need, you're going to be able to create a value proposition, a notion of how you're delivering value to those users. So once you've unlocked the secrets of the universe by doing that, this other stuff becomes, it's not easy, but it certainly comes from that. So how do you do it? What are the goals that are going to get me there to delivering on that promise? What activities? And then what's it going to cost? And then our little red bar at the bottom, how are we going to identify the sources of funding and other kinds of support we're going to need? This kind of exercise is great to do once, but it's not a one-time operation. It's something that kind of cycle that feeds on itself if it's going well, and it continues to replenish itself. So if you're delivering value to users, there are going to be inputs into the system. It's going to appear to be successful because it is, and it will hopefully continue to attract new sources of support, whatever they are. So today, the piece that we're focusing on, though, is really the audience piece. And I like to keep this little graphic the same because throughout this series, we've moved around. We did a session that was on funding sources. We're doing a session today on audience. And we'll be doing a session next week that's going to be tackling the question of the environment that you're operating in. So this is just to keep reminding folks that this is really a system. These topics don't really exist separate from each other. So the role of the audience in sustainability is central. And there are lots of different ways that this can play out. So I want us to all think really broadly about how it plays out. Let's imagine you've crafted your strong value proposition. Then in an ideal world, you have developed something that is meeting the needs of those users and stakeholders. It may be that you're helping folks do something that they couldn't even do at all without you. It may just be that you're doing it in a way that is particularly more enjoyable and satisfying than what they were attempting to do before. And, it could even be that you're doing it better in other ways, like it's less expensive to deliver or quicker, more impactful on a quicker time scale than was possible without you, whatever it is. This can lead to a lot of great outcomes. So the most obvious one is kind of the impact that I know you all measure in lots of different ways. So for example, one great outcome could be that lots more people participate the enrollment in your programs grows, your number of partners increases, the number of institutions you work with is greater, or all of a sudden you have lots of volunteers who want to participate. You'll see if it's working. Those are great metrics. But delivering something users want has great other benefits as well. Because once you have those other users and you have evidence that people love it and there's impact, that certainly is a terrific argument to bring back to your host institution. And I've studied this a bit, but it's also quite obvious if you think about it. Sustainability is really hard, and often for a lot of initiatives, a host institution ends up playing a tremendous role in supporting academic projects, these projects and centers, when other sources of support are difficult to find. And finally, and this is a topic we talked about in our last session, but it's certainly in the back, if not the front of all of our minds, by having that demonstrated impact and users who are happy and stakeholders who feel like you're delivering something, it opens up to all kinds of other potential revenue sources. It could be income from registration, from sales. It might be a membership model that you create. It can be corporate sponsorships, as Deidre Sullivan shared with us, that the MATE project has had. There's all kinds of other potential benefits. So here's a little example of how this works. And then you'll hear some actual examples from the PIs who are on the call with us today. I love the eBird project. I know it might seem a little bit silly to bring this in. It's not an ATU project or center, but it is an NSF-funded initiative at Cornell University at the Lab of Ornithology. And those who have met me before know that I keep calling this example out, but it's a great example. So this is a digital, it's a website, essentially, that was created initially by ornithologists as a way to unlock the question of, there are so many birders out there, people are watching birds, observing them all the time. Wouldn't it be great for us as the research community to have access to all that data? So I'll give you the short version of this, and there is a fully written case study you can find online if you're interested in hearing all the detail. But essentially, a first version of this was really done from the point of view of researchers. We want data. How can we get data from all these birders? And you know what? The birders weren't so excited. The birders said doing something altruistically for the betterment of humanity is nice, but actually I want to keep my list of the birds I've spotted this week. And it took a little while for the leaders at eBird to figure this out. And it seems like a subtle change, but it was a pivotal change. Once they realized that they weren't really addressing what those really millions of birding enthusiasts needed, which was to have a really clean and easy way to track the birds they'd seen, once they figured that out, the whole game changed. They started developing things that were really great for birders to use, and you know what? The numbers skyrocketed. So it has become an extremely valuable resource also now for ornithologists and for those who study these major trends in bird migration and ecosystems. So for example, deep user knowledge, in this case, a huge increase in the user base and all these birding observations gives them all of these other wonderful outcomes. More observations leads to the greater value of that database. You know, for lots of people, whether it's the high-level scientists or just us amateurs who think it's cool to see what the most common birds are in my neighborhood. This international reputation they've developed, because people publish articles out of this now, is a huge benefit, and their host institution has been willing to help them support it. And finally, again, this huge and very engaged user base has made it possible to attract corporate sponsorships, like an optics manufacturer, for example, and also has encouraged other interesting kind of spin-off initiatives. So they're able to license their software to other nature centers that use this, and this provides an extra stream for them. So a little food for thought. Audience is key. If you deliver what they need, the benefits are many. So should I pause for some questions here? Let's see what we've got.
It looks like there's a question for Max about surveying audiences. So he's asking, he does survey his audience, but he's wondering how large a sample size he needs to shoot for. Like, you know, is it a percentage? Is it 5, 10, 100 people? What's your sense of that, Nancy?
You know, I think a lot of it will depend on we're going to talk a little bit about methodology later on in the hour. But in general, the first question is, what do you need to know? Is it the kind of information that lends itself to learning that through a survey? And I know I'm backing up before your actual question, but that's a good first question because a survey may not be the quickest way to get you there. And then in terms of the sample size, a lot will have to do again about you know, how big your audience is in the first place. So you can have a relatively small number percentage-wise and still get a good number. So I don't think there's any kind of hard and fast number on whether it's 5, 10, or 100. It really depends on what you're starting with as the basis. So, but let's make sure to get back to that because there also may be others on the line who have done this and who have thoughts to share on that too. So now that I have entirely convinced you about the importance and centrality of audience, let's see what that looks like on the ground. So Rachel, you want to lead us our third poll question?
Yeah, here we go. So we want to know a little bit about what you feel like you understand about your audience. So do you feel like you have a firm understanding of how many people attend your events or use your materials, the makeup, the demographic makeup of your users, the variety of and the range of ways people benefit from the materials or the activities or courses? And also, do you feel like you have a firm understanding of what people find to be the greatest value? So sort of back to that value proposition, like what do you feel like you have a handle on what's most valuable? All right. So people are definitely responding to this one. And it looks like those first three are very even at the moment, Nancy. The last one, not surprisingly, that's often the hardest one to figure out.
Yeah. Yeah, and so, right, and I agree, Rachel. And, you know, the first one, I'm trying to remember, I think these have now been set up to be multiple choice. And I think, you know, most people, you know, how many people attend our events, that is countable, right? I know that everyone counts. But so I know that that's not particularly challenging for folks. Demographics are harder, but because you're working often with students and faculty, and often, you know, in an in-person setting, again, those things are more reasonable to expect that you would get. In terms of the next couple questions, how do people benefit from what it is we do? And what people find to be the greatest value of what it is we do, those are devilishly difficult. And I think that the point is that we all go into our projects and, you know, and grants thinking that we know what we hope they will get from it. And then we have to figure out if that actually is what they think. So we're going to talk a little bit about some ways that you might kind of firm up and take what I'd call now might be an assumption and turn that into something a little bit more concrete. So I think we can close the poll. Okay, great. Thank you, Rachel. So who is your audience? Now, you know, that sounds very easy in a way, right? It's the students in a program, it's the faculty whose curriculum we're developing, that sort of thing. But I'm also going to encourage you to think about it in as much detail as possible. And why? First is because it might suggest different sets of issues and questions those different segments might have. And second, sometimes doing this also can encourage you to identify new slices. And again, it's kind of close to home, right, Rachel? I mean, I don't think, when we first started, we assumed our audience was exactly one thing, which were ATE grantees.
Absolutely.
And so a little knock on the side of the head to see, wow, we actually, even within this space, have another audience emerging is wonderful to see. And we want all of you to think about it in those same terms. So I would go out on a limb here and say, but actually, there might be folks who would argue with this. It would be fun to do this in real time in the same space so everyone could actually argue it with me live on the line. But I'd say, I assume that a primary focus for everyone on the line would be some combination of students and faculty, right? And the institutions that they are part of, meaning that NSF has funded us to deliver something that improves the lives of students, that gets them from here to there, that helps faculty be using the most cutting-edge curricula, that sort of thing. And then I would say that there's tons of other stakeholders that benefit from this program. So, you know, the obvious one would be industry partners who get trained, you know, a trained workforce. Your host institution is a stakeholder. Although I'll admit that I've heard folks say that many of your host institutions may not recognize you as much as you wish they would, but they could be, and they could be a big cheerleader. Your funder for sure is a key stakeholder. You know, you hope it's not the only stakeholder, but it's certainly a series of people and the organization that you want to be very happy with the work you do. And then there are corporate sponsors who may just be supporting your work slightly less than the industry partners, but in the same idea. I think we'll hear an interesting approach on this from Marilyn about just how primary some of those industry partners can be, but this is just a first pass at how to think of primary versus other audiences. So when I say to look into this in some detail, this is just a taste of what I'm talking about, and then we're going to hear from some of our guest panelists. So often when we work with clients or folks in workshops, we'll say, tell me who the audience is, and they'll write down one word, it'll be faculty. So I can't quibble with that. There's absolutely nothing wrong about that. That absolutely is the right answer. But I'd love to hear what the next stage is, to think about, well, exactly which courses are we talking about? Are you limiting it to the people in your program? Could it be extensible at other institutions? Well, maybe the material was developed for people at this level, but could it also be useful at other levels, schools, et cetera, et cetera? So this is just one example of how you might take what seems like a very simple answer and actually break it down into a rainbow of colors that might suggest other approaches and ways to identify who exactly this audience is. So I'm going to pause, and I'm going to turn this over to Tom to give us an example of the different audience segments the way Vesta sees it. So, I know, Tom,
Thank you very much.
Sure.
You know, I should be online right now.
Yep, it's all you.
Yep. Okay, very good. Thank you. So this has really been an interesting question for us as we look at audience and who our primary focus is. Keep in mind, this has evolved historically. So when Vesta first started, it was really 3 states, Missouri, Illinois, and Iowa. Oklahoma came on as well late in the grant preparation as a project. And the whole premise behind Vesta was to develop a trained workforce for the industry. That would be the wine and grape industry. These Midwestern states were expanding in their industry, and really one of the limiting factors was to have individuals that had some technical skill and technical knowledge. What we found out, though, which really caused us to change over time where we were focused, was as we began to look at who our students were, and I would use students almost in quotation marks. As we began to get that demographic data, the average age of our student was 44 years old. More than 50% had at least a bachelor's degree. We had a number of students that had advanced degrees and a number of students that had professional degrees, attorneys, doctors. So it became pretty clear early on in the process that at least half of our audience was not your traditional student. At least half of the audience we would put in the classification of entrepreneurs. These were individuals looking to take a hobby and move it into a business, or already had a business and looking to find ways to expand it with technical knowledge. And so the slide that's up right now, you can see the dramatic growth in student numbers. Starting out in 2004, 35 students from 7 states. Now we have a total student participation, probably closer now to 1,800 students as of today, from 45 different states and 5 foreign countries. And Vesta continues to grow and expand as we add states and it's interesting to see the foreign students as well.
Tom, did you mention what that point of inflection was due to? What exciting thing happened in that year that sent you rocketing?
Well, I think what happened is really we went from a project to a regional center, and then from a regional center to a national center. If I can go back to that slide, if you look at that time period, Michigan State actually came in 2009 in, I think, the third year of the regional center. So really that period, in 2008, 2007, 2008, went from a project to a regional center. And then the growth has been fairly dramatic since that point. So it's really a matter of expanding the footprint of Vesta that created that. But again, without that demographic knowledge, we would have no idea who our students or who our audiences were. Like Marilyn, I would also almost think of industry in the wine and grape industry as one of our primary focus, not a secondary focus, because from day one it was planned to have industry very, very involved in Vesta. So you can see from the next slide that I put up, partnerships with educational institutions. 2003, there were 3 that started Vesta, and now all those in yellow at the end of our last National Center grant were part of Vesta. And you can see them listed. I think there's about 24 different institutions that are listed. I think we have about 19 states in total. So when we think about industry, our industry partners have always been engaged in Vesta and really in 2 major events, which actually, because of funding, is becoming one event. We always had an annual meeting, and if you are involved in Vesta as a state coordinator, that's kind of our structure. So I am a state coordinator for Michigan. I also happen to be a PI on the grant. But we are required to bring an industry representative to each of our major Vesta meetings. Again, starting with a new National Center grant, we're going to have one large national summit, but in the past we've had an annual meeting held in conjunction with a major industry conference. And then we also had a curriculum retreat where we reviewed every course in the curriculum. And we, again, engaged industry. So you think of all these partner institutions coming together, each one bringing an industry representative, and they're the ones that really weigh in on the curriculum. Because of that demographic, understanding that at least half of our students were really in that classification of entrepreneurs, that allowed us to successfully launch a new educational track in the area of entrepreneurship based on this communicated industry and student need and interest. So it was no longer, well, we need to know how to grow grapes, we need to know how to make wine. Those are still very important to Vesta, but what it really has become is a third track, people saying, I need to know how to run the business.
It looks like we may have lost Tom momentarily. Tom, can you hear us?
So now I can. Can you hear me?
Yep, you're back.
Okay, I lost my connection. My apologies.
No worries.
I'm not seeing any slides for some reason.
Every so often something interesting happens, but
okay, well I can keep talking.
You know, you had one last bullet, so I can mention to you that you were going to talk a little bit about the course practicums.
Okay, well, let me just also mention about the occupational competencies. Maybe you cut me off because that was my cue to shut up, but the occupational competencies came about when we, again, engaged very strongly with industry, and industry started to ask questions like, well, okay, what can you do with a Vesta degree, a Vesta certificate, a Vesta credential, a Vesta course? And the students were asking that same thing. And if you look at Department of Labor and their the SIC codes, their standard industry codes, they're really not well, they don't do a very good job when we look at much of agriculture. They certainly don't do a very good job when we look at the wine and grape industry. So they're very limited. So we set off on a task to work with industry to sit down and actually develop the occupational competencies required for a number of different jobs within a vineyard and a number of jobs within a winery. The last thing that you brought up is the area of practicums. So you may be wondering, how do you do online wine and grape education? Well, the online component includes a live session every week, which allows the instructors and the students to get to know one another. It's interesting to see the students get to know one another, even though they're from different states or even different countries. But most of our technical courses have a required practicum that the student needs to arrange with a local vineyard or local winery. And there are so many hours that they have to do related to the individual courses. And that, again, is another way to increase our industry connections. I will stop there, and again, just to let you know, I have no slides that I'm looking at, and hopefully all that came through.
That was terrific, Tom. Before we move on, does anyone out there have a specific question for Tom about the way that they think about their various audience and stakeholders? And if not, that's fine. He will still be here as the webinar goes on.
And just
It
also,
looks like
I can't see the chat box or anything. So if you're asking me a question and I don't answer it, I'm not being rude.
It's okay. I'm gonna look at the box and I will pick out a question if there is one, and if not, we'll come back. It is a-okay. You have one question from Mark Hendrickson about asking if Vesta has developed a professional development curriculum.
So that whole question about sustainability is critical. One of my colleagues likes to say that the world is round and grants end. You could probably add death and taxes to those certainties. But clearly, as Vesta continues, all of us that are intimately involved in it want to make sure that there is a way to continue Vesta after the grant dollars end. We have certainly relied on a lot of the grant dollars to get to where we are at today. There are some things that we do, but as far as the professional curriculum, we're really looking very closely at doing things like customized training, working with large industry partners that need to have either their clientele trained or internal to their own business training done. And I don't know if that's what you mean by professional development. We are going to be spending some time at this year's National Summit working with faculty development. So making sure our faculty is effectively delivering in this online platform. And you can imagine when you go from 3 states and a few dozen students to now 21, 24 states with 1,500 students, that's going to take a lot more instructors. So one of the pieces that we're focusing on is making sure that we have instruction across Vesta. So I'm not sure I answered the question, but feel free to clarify it if you can, and they'll hopefully read.
That's terrific. So let's move on. I want to make sure we have a chance to get to Marilyn as well, and then circle back. We'll have Tom back on the line later in the presentation. So some of the key questions you want to interrogate yourself about is what value, when I think about these stakeholder groups, what value are they deriving from what it is I'm doing? And again, it sounds obvious at first, but every time we do an exercise like this with folks, there's always an interesting revelation that comes out when you actually are forced to answer the question in this kind of point-blank way. And then what value does each segment offer? And just to put into context, Tom's example, which I think is a great one, it's so interesting that the work that they did surfaced the fact that they had a bunch of kind of second career, entrepreneurial-minded students in the mix, which was completely unforeseen. So there's a tremendous value for Vesta to serve them. Are they as valuable to fulfilling the mission of Vesta as community college students, as other students? Are they possibly more valuable in some ways because potentially down the road would this segment be able to pay for what they're getting in a way that other kinds of students might not be? So thinking in both ways, what are they getting from us? What can we get from them? Can prompt some very interesting discoveries. Other kinds of things to think about include really quantifying what those segments are. Now, in some cases, you may be working with a kind of a closed community. It's students at my institution in these 3 courses. And so this isn't rocket science, right? You can count up the number of people coming through. In a case of something like Vesta, though, it could be the field could be much, much larger. I mean, the potential, how many people out there might be someday interested in an entrepreneurial program like this? How many institutions in the country may someday want their own enology program, even if they don't have vineyards next door? The questions become important when you think about how you can scale from something small like a project to something bigger. And again, always thinking about, is this the right thing to do? Is getting bigger and with these new segments something that actually contributes to our sustainability? One of our presenters last week, who I believe is with us again today, had a terrific example, and this is Deidre again from the MATE program, where they literally did, for not their entire initiative, but just for one slice of it, a little exercise to understand market size. So I'm resharing a slide that we shared in our last webinar that Deidre developed to really break something down. If they were looking at selling robotics kits, how many did they think they could sell? And on that specific initiative, working through from the biggest numbers, the millions of students in the target grades, down to the likelihood of the number of people participating in robotics, and kind of working that out to their estimate of what they think they'll get. And as she reported in the webinar, in our last webinar, these are higher numbers than they've seen so far, but they feel like they are tracking in a way that this actually may be what comes to pass. So it's a terrific exercise to do. It certainly isn't, you're not guaranteed that you will make those targets, but estimating them is much healthier than not. And it also encourages you to aim high when you think about the impact it could have. So now I'm going to take another break and turn it over to Marilyn, who's going to tell us a little bit about FLATE. And Marilyn, I know you let us know how your audio is, but for the next couple minutes, if you could talk us through how you and the FLATE understand audience and the ways it's contributed to sustainability.
Okay, so let's see. Can you hear me?
Sounds great.
Awesome. Okay. So I didn't spend too much time earlier talking about FLATE and the center as kind of an organization. We were funded first as a regional center in 2004, and we had some previous ATE experience with a couple projects prior to that. So we got into the center mode over 10 years ago and started to identify what we were supposed to do. We had the ATE mission in mind, and just for review, that mission is definitely to meet industry needs for a advanced technician workforce. So to us, that immediately said that meant graduates of our 2-year technical programs that support manufacturing, since that's our discipline area, and that we had some kind of pockets of areas that we could pigeonhole our activities in to help us kind of sort out what we were doing, always looking to supporting the programs themselves so we produced good graduates that industry would hire immediately when they got out of the programs. And so those areas, many of you in AT community know are outreach and recruitment, those that support strong programs, professional development to improve the teachers both technically and pedagogically, and then also to work on curriculum, an innovative curriculum to meet industry needs whatever area that means. So next slide, please. We do that in our second round of funding. We actually took a bold step and put making sure that FLATE's mission is sustained as one of our goals. As we thought about, well, what happens next after our first round of funding and we were applying for a renewal, we weren't sure we had any pieces in place to do that, and granted, we hadn't thought about it too much prior to that as we were getting started. But it became a regular focus of our leadership team and our engineering technology community, which is where we actually put our hold on sustainability. So for us, the community is the community of educators and their extended programs and all of the people in their programs around the state that were engaged in this kind of education, this particular engineering technology degree, which has a lot of different subsets to it. So we developed this kind of a graphic to build our community over the years and add to it. We have the ET degree as our central stake, and that produces graduates for industry. It engages faculty, engages the students, and then we provide a lot of different mechanisms for them to continue to be engaged and enrich the community. So part of our mission was always to make sure that we were producing the graduates that industry wanted, producing enough of them, and keeping our community together as building capacity through the people involved to help sustain the activities and the curriculum that we were developing with them. Next slide, please. So this is our community today. We started with 3 colleges in 2005 with our new degree program and have grown to 19 in the state. So it's a little more challenging to keep all these folks connected, especially those out in the Panhandle, but we work hard at that, getting them together twice a year. Next, please. So some of the growth because of this community, keeping people engaged, both our industry partners and our educational partners, and indirectly then their students, is we've developed additional programs based on local needs around the state that fall under our degree plan. So, for example, we now have an electric relay substation specialized track for the energy industry that falls under our program, a new addition this particular year. And I'll just walk through what's on this graph. The actual number of ET specializations, so those would be different programs. Simplifying that, there's started with 3, there's now 10, and the number of different certificates. So underneath each of the degrees, there's a number of college credit certificates. That's grown quite a bit over the years, along with the new programs. And then the number of colleges offering the degree is the yellow bar, which we saw on the map previously. And the other graph here shows the increased enrollment. Of course, some of that is due to additional programs across the state, but we've also seen really strong growth in individual programs, which we track every year with a rather lengthy and report of the enrollment in the different college and high school and technical college programs in the state. Next slide. So this is just a visual of some visuals of our engineering technology forum, which is where we put the glue to the actual community, trying to engage all of the partners who are working with us and build capacity, help them learn what they need to learn, help them learn from each other, and share what they're doing with other folks. So really a great community that we have in Florida. It's very unstructured. Anybody can come, anybody can leave. We just get together twice a year in a real forum kind of a situation. All right, next slide. So these are our I would say, some of our big stakeholders, but I still keep the industry piece for us as the prize. If our graduates are getting hired around the state, which we also can track, we know we're doing the right thing. We're doing a good job with producing students that can be placed in industry in good, high-paying, high-tech jobs. So a couple years ago, our NVC, as we approached the end of another round of funding, challenged us with, well, what does sustainability really mean to you? And tell us what you're going to do with all of these great activities that you've been doing and coordinating over the years if the funding died tomorrow. So we developed our own kind of working chart, which you'll see a snapshot of one page here. And we actually parsed out different activities. Now these activities support the community we were just talking about. So these are things that we ran primarily out of the Slate office and supported with NSF funding, especially in the beginning. And we decided that for those that we thought really had value, as told to us through our stakeholder surveys and our feedback from our partners, which we do every year, that we would work to figure out how we could sustain it into the future. And the strategy we took was to find partners somewhere to engage with the activity with us that had similar values and similar motivation, and see if we could start transferring some of the activities to other organizations or other institutions, whatever, as a stakeholder, as the institutionalization sort of pathway, but going through a partnership process and transfer process. So a couple examples here I'll mention quickly. We have an educator award program that we've run out of the Slate Center for a number of years. 2 years ago, we partnered with the state CTE organization. We're now engaged in transferring that ownership to that organization. The awards program will be kept as Slate Manufacturing Educator Awards for the state, and this year we'll have our first award ceremony with them instead of independently. It will be at their annual conference. We have some more work to do beyond that. We will have to transfer the sponsorship that we've developed for that program, but they have the capacity and longevity to continue that for as long as the organization is around, for that matter. So that's one strategy we've done.
So can I just jump in? And this is just to clarify, because what you're describing here for sustainability actually looks like how you would kind of willingly and intentionally put yourself out of business, right? And so in other words, this is sustainability for the outputs, the successful outputs of the Slate program, but this is not a plan to keep Slate running forever. This is almost like exit strategy so that the good work you've done continue on. Yeah.
Exactly. So there is some work, of course, that we would like to continue, and that we've actually defined. I'll just go through a couple more ideas down in this that I put on this page. One is the production of video that we made that we use for educational purposes, for outreach and recruitment ideas and awareness around the state. We made hard copies of those. We did the videography, had all that done, and its end game is that whoever knows how long it'll be posted on YouTube, but that's it. There's no currently no organization in Florida that is willing or interested in keeping that updated or doing another version of it. We're still on the lookout. Florida Makes might be, our new MEP might be a candidate for that, but we're not really sure. So we've kind of we don't discuss that too much. We haven't actively engaged in that since we've kind of determined that it may not have a good long-term home. But down at the bottom, the two that are green, there are our summer robotics programs, which have been really successful at our host college, HCC. One of the things we've done is engaged other colleges and organizations, some schools, some local organizations, to put these kinds of camps on, and we've commercialize it. We developed good curriculum. We've provided it for these other organizations around the state and other schools to use, and that's exactly what they're doing. So we've built capacity in some of those partners, including our own institution, to put on a good summer program for middle and high school students. All right, next slide. And we have a big matrix. It's like 6 pages, so there's lots of things going on there. for parsing this out. And I would say we do honor our partners and have nice website presence for all of them on our online presence. And it's important to us to do this to make sure that they know that we think they're important and that we engage with them as often as we can and keep them in the loop and be sure that they have value, find value in the work that we do together, and also learn more about our niche audience, which I would say is those interested in manufacturing and manufacturing education, that they bring that into their organizations because many of them had not focused on that particular discipline area in the past. Next slide. And so here's the award example I mentioned on the other page. Been doing it for a long number of years. Here's our awardees, and the sponsorship is the last piece that we'll be transferring after the July meeting this year. Okay, next slide. And another example of this is more, again, not the core of what we do. These activities support our mission to have good curriculum, produce good graduates that meet industry needs, but reaching out to get those students is sometimes a challenge, and we've built capacity within the state to provide student tours many years ago, one school to one company, and did that for a number of years, and joined the Manufacturing Day National Initiative 4 years ago to spread this across the state with a goal of having the most student tours in the country in one state, which we've actually managed to accomplish. But we did this through engaging partners, many of them the organizations on the previous slide, and manufacturing regional associations, manufacturing companies, individual companies, economic development partners that we have that worked very closely with us in their own region to pair up a number of schools and companies to have this kind of massive activity on one particular day in October to promote the high-skill, high-wage jobs in manufacturing to our students and our secondary educators. Okay, next slide. And lastly, again, on the partnership model, we've used our partners very targetedly, I would say, with a special target, something like that, to increase our professional development opportunities for offerings and opportunities for educators in the state and elsewhere. One feedback that we continuously get back every 2 years when we do a stakeholder survey is that we need more professional development from our education sector. And we've been able to do this increase in the number of total hours that we offer every year because we've engaged a lot of other partners to both support it financially as well as time and expertise-wise. So we've grown that with pretty consistent, good responses from the participants over the years, which is the graph on the right with the red bars. And you'll see some of the partners there at the bottom, some of their logos.
Sorry.
And that's all right, one more slide there. And so typical different venues that we use for that, various day-length, day-long or multi-day workshops, on the district professional days for the secondary educators, webinars, presentations, course material, and of course our ET forum, which for our main educator target at the 2-year college level is our primary vehicle for professional development. Okay.
Terrific. So, we're going to thank you so much, Marilyn, and we're going to take a moment to see if there are questions, but actually I already saw a great one in there. Someone asked if, I think you have a lot of metrics, but do you keep like a dashboard? For example, where you mentioned tracking student employment. Do you have a dash with some key performance indicators that you track on a regular basis?
I guess we don't have it in a dashboard format, but we do track a lot of those things. As Florida, one of the reasons we actually stayed as a regional center for the state is we have a statewide education system. So the programs, similar programs are actually the same program under the Department of Education, and they also have great metrics. So we've been able to build a good partnership with several of the DOE organizations, and getting the metrics on graduation and placement. It's not perfect, I don't think, but we do. We're able to request different varieties of what that looks like from every year from those organizations, from the Department of Ed. And for the graduate working, there's graduate tracking. There's actually some information shared with the Department of Economic Opportunity, which houses our workforce boards in Florida, and the Department of Ed. So they have some. We have to ask for the right data between the two organizations, and sometimes mush some of that together to get what we want out of it. But we've managed to develop that kind of partnership. So we do have it. We don't have it all in one place in a dashboard. Maybe we should do that.
Well, I know after this webinar, we all have homework, it looks like.
Yeah,
so,
right.
So let's move on, because we have a couple of nice next sessions coming, and Marilyn, that was really just so wonderful, and I always wish we had so much longer to kind of delve into these. We'll get through as much as we can, and hopefully there'll be more questions for you as the webinar continues. But let's talk a little bit about some tips for getting started, because I saw a lot of chatter going on in that chat window about methods, so we can at least give an overview of that, and then even Tom and Marilyn, you can jump back in and tell how you've done it. But let's kick it off with a poll question for everybody. So Rachel,
all right, folks. Sure. Let's see how folks are currently working to understand their audience. The first option being gathering quantitative data on things like usage and engagement. The second being interviews. I know this is something Deidre really promoted heavily, the efficacy of those interviews with core audience members, and then surveys, of course. And if you do check other, we'd love to hear about it in the chat window.
All right, so we're getting some interesting results here. So in terms of those, and this is also, I believe you can check as many of these things as you do. But most people, it looks like, who are responding are saying that they are gathering quantitative data on usage and engagement. And I'm guessing that what we're talking about is, how many students are here, how many people came to a workshop, how many people have made use of our materials because they downloaded something or that sort of thing. And that's terrific. And the beauty of that is a lot of those things are actually countable and capturable. In terms of conducting in-depth interviews with members of an audience, it's nice to see that there are 11 respondents who are doing that. Because as anyone who's done it knows, even though you can get pretty far with a survey with some factual questions, the things you learn when people start talking are always going to be valuable, and they're often surprising and for very productive reasons. Surveying our audience, it looks like a lot of folks are doing that, and that's also terrific. We're going to talk a little bit about the reasons that certain methods may be more useful than others. And finally, other, and I'm always curious I don't know if any one of the 4 folks who checked other feels like typing in and telling us what other tactics they might be using. I'll take a breath to see if anyone will respond on that. But this is terrific, and it's nice to see how many different methods people are using. So I'll keep looking at the chat in case something juicy comes across. But Rachel, I think we can close the poll.
I think we can close it, Mike.
So yeah, so getting started with this, I'll show this to you. Folks who have been in, when Rachel and I do like a half-day workshop, this is often a document we will use. And I'm just going to show this to folks because I always love, it seems so simple. There's just a bunch of boxes, you could write anything you like in them. But actually, once you start working through it systematically, what it has the value of doing is showing you the things you know and the things you don't quite know. I'm going to flip forward to see what these key questions are, and then we'll go back and look at that chart. So what we tend to do with folks, and again, this is really just a taste hopefully you can join us at one of the in-person events where we have some real time to kind of dig into those questions together. We just first ask people to answer the questions. But then the next pass of it is, which of the things I just wrote down do I actually know based on some defensible data, and which are really just in the realm of good guesses? And then finally, you look at what can you firm up. So let's take a quick look. We talked first about the idea of end users. You know, we could have said key audience, core audience. And there's only one box, but for you, it might be several. For you, your core audience could be, you know, the faculty at my institution, faculty in such and such discipline. And as Marilyn has pointed out very clearly, for her, and possibly actually for many of you on this call, you actually want to think about your industry partners as a core audience. If they're not happy, it's not going to, what you're doing isn't really working as well as you wish it was. So you have industry partners, but they really may be a core audience for you. You can also run through this exercise thinking about your host institution as one of these key stakeholder groups. It's a little more subtle, their benefits are a little more abstract, but certainly very important. So we encourage people to first sketch out what does this sector look like? Who are these people? What do I know about them in terms of the detail we discussed a few slides back? We encourage you to talk about the value, that next column over. What do you think they value most about your project or center? What are they getting from it? So, you know, for students, you might think it has to do with preparing me for my next job, but maybe there are other things too that you hadn't thought of. Maybe that's something different, and in fact, I feel like the Vesta example might be a great case of that, where learning about what people who want immediately to have their own business, showed up as a key value. What's the contribution to sustainability? How is catering to this particular stakeholder slice going to help support your project or center? And by that, what I mean is it just core to what you do? Is it your job and your mission to make sure that they're happy about what you're doing and getting benefit from it? Or are they useful because they might support you in terms of revenue? Several different folks have mentioned today that there are actually corporate sponsors. So that's a different kind of stakeholder and a different kind of way they can contribute to your sustainability. When we really get into the weeds on tactics, which we won't do quite as much today, there's an entire piece of work to think about. Now that I know who these people are, I now need to know how to reach them. Are there associations? Are there lists? Are there events? Are there publications? Literally, how do I connect the dots between what I'm expressing and who I want to reach? And then these other questions we've covered lightly about how big and significant is this segment? How, what's the significance overall? And finally, centrality to mission, just so we keep our focus where it needs to be. Is this an interesting group or a really critical group for us to be a successful project or center? So I'll mention briefly what these forms of desk research are, because I see we're getting close to the end, and I certainly want to at least signal some areas. There is an appalling amount of great information that is freely available out there once you start looking. So I'd encourage anyone who wants to firm up their understanding of the scope of a certain segment just by starting to look online. You can dig up tremendous amounts of quantitative data on the audience just by looking at people's websites. Usually not the home page, but if you look for annual reports, you can look for promotional materials they've created. You can look at press releases. You can look at their 990s. There's all kinds of great information that is out there that actually can yield a tremendous amount of information. And then even when websites and public records don't give you exactly what you're looking for, there are ways to find people, at least online, who then can be approached. Depending on what field you're looking at, people can be remarkably willing to share. Now let's talk a little bit about what we mean when we say surveys. When I think about a survey in this case, I'm thinking about like a questionnaire, really. These days it's almost entirely done online. But it's not always easy. It has to be done quite right, and as those of you know who've tried it, getting those questions right is the key to getting information that's worth anything. So it's not necessarily as easy as it looks, but it's a great tool if, once you've identified your information needs, the information you need is fact-based. You can certainly ask questions about attitudes, and people do that all the time. And that just has to also be worded very carefully. But if you're looking for a large number of people, you can identify the target audience And you can ask a very careful, unambiguous question, whether it's about, something that they do or their opinion to something. The more precise it can be and the more unambiguous it can be, the better chance you'll have of getting good data. There's lots of free tools out there. I'm sure many of you have used SurveyMonkey or whatever. There's many, many out there these days. So the tools are not particularly complicated, although you can run extremely sophisticated surveys that do all kinds of things with piping and filtering and branching. But even at the most basic level, you can get a decent amount of information. Again, what it really comes down to is first figuring out what is it that you need to know. And again, when we work with folks, we could spend a whole day just on answering the question, what is it that we really need to know? And only then do you go around to design the questions. The piece that Deidre and Mike Lasecki were talking about earlier in the webinar, at least in the chat window, has to do with interviewing. So some people, you could call it surveying in the sense that you're going to cover a broad swath of people. But for clarity, I'll just call it interviewing. And the idea here is that once you had broken down your audience into these discrete pools, let's say these are my faculty, these are my students, maybe I think I want to study students who are in this geographic area versus students someplace else. Or if you're the VESTA project, people who are students enrolled in a community college versus students who are older and returning to school. Once you've figured out what those segments are, that's when you're going to figure out what the right number is for you. 100 is not a magic number and 10 is not a magic number. What I've heard and what I've done is that once you have those segments well defined, you need to have enough people in each segment interviewed so that you start to get a sense for if there's a real there and a real answer. So people will tell you, once you have those boxes set up and you know who the different sectors are, you want to have 3 or 4 people in each box who meet those criteria so that you haven't finished your study and I only actually interviewed one person who meets those criteria and I'm going to try to draw conclusions from one person. So it has more to do with the way you understand the sectors and the segments you care about. So what kinds of things are you going to ask? You're going to want people to talk about what they do and how they do it and what's important to them. And again, the questions will always come from what it is you need to understand. Again, it's very hard to go into too much detail here, but this is a great way to hear from people directly about what their lives are like, and then to extrapolate how what you do can make their lives even better. So we are getting awfully close, but I would love it if Tom and then perhaps Marilyn could briefly tell us what tools and tactics they have used and what they have found to be the most useful for them. So Tom, would you start?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Thank you. So we use a number of tools, and actually I also want to give kudos out to our external evaluator who, her work, Elaine Kraft from, I think, State is the company in South Carolina, does a tremendous job of collecting data and some of the demographic work. So I put down a number of tools and tactics that we use. Certainly we use program and course evaluations. And part of what we ask the students is, are you planning on taking another VESTA course? Would you recommend VESTA courses to other students? And that type of information. And our numbers are very high when it comes to that. We do use some surveys, but they are very specific on what we're trying to get at. For example, we just sent out a survey to both instructors, students, and also to industry mentors regarding the practicums and how can they be improved. We have direct industry and student communication by state coordinators and the VESTA management team. And a good example of this is, as a state coordinator, I am currently working with our industry in Michigan to help them form a statewide association. So I'm playing an integral role in that because I have some experience in commodity groups and nonprofit formation. And I was very clear on telling them what my agenda was. My agenda is that the stronger the industry is, the more they're going to have a need for what I offer, which is the training component.
So,
We have, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I just want to, we're just going to have to move along. So was there anything else you wanted to add? I wanted to make sure we get to
Just
Marilyn.
look at, we talked about educational competencies already, the student engagement, and I think that pretty much summarizes, because I've discussed these other things. The National Summit is really the combination of the annual meeting and the curriculum retreat. So I will end there.
Thank you, and I hate inviting someone and then rushing them. It's like the worst situation to be in, but we've had so much to cover. And Marilyn, would you like to share with us, and again, if you could just give us the quick overview of the kinds of things you found the most useful, and from what the little you've told me, I think it has to do with, you know, the times you bring industry inside the work you do.
Sure. I hope it can still be heard. We use many of those same kinds of tactics. Of course, we do surveys at the end of events. We do have, thanks to our evaluator, who's we have a Baldrige evaluation model that we overlay our NSF kind of data collecting work that we do, and we actually have an organizational review every 2 years, which we actually have, and which we get a lot of value from, but not data. It's you know, how we do the things we do. And we also do a biannual stakeholder survey where we look at specific groups of stakeholders or audiences. So the educators get separated from the industry partners, and et cetera. So that survey does not go out to the students. We survey students as they leave the colleges, and sometimes as they enter. Some of the colleges do enter. What brought you to this program? To help us see what it is we need. I think the most important thing that we do is get out and talk to industry partners and all of the partners that we engage with, and developing a relationship with them so we are comfortable asking them to do things and to help us when we have a particular need. But on the flip side, it also provides them the comfort and the knowing that they can come to us. And so I think just through a lot of conversation, we gather information that feeds our industry and partner meetings. It comes from these in-between, you know, somebody called and asked about this, or I saw them at a different organization meeting, or I was visiting this college and they're wondering about this, and bringing that back to the bigger pool to see, is this an issue and something for everyone else as well. So a lot of feet on the ground, I would say, for gathering information, but then not just gathering it, you've got to organize it and use it beyond the gathering.
So that's it. Thank you so much, Marilyn. And that actually is such a great kind of note to end this section on, because I'm sure everyone listening has taken the message, both from what Tom has said and what Marilyn has said, that it really isn't just one activity. It's multiple activities happening pretty much all the time, and a lot of feet on the ground, and a lot of listening very closely. So it's not something we do just to evaluate, you know, once a year, but it's a whole suite of ways to listen and ways to participate. So to sum it all up, your audience and stakeholders couldn't be any more central to the success of what it is you're doing. And finding ways to address what it is that they need is going to be key to your sustainability. In our last session, we heard a lot about how that could actually lead to revenue. In this session, the forms of benefit have tended to be more mission-based and more audience and impact-based, but no less critical to sustainability. So those are all key things to think about going forward, and humbling to hear how many different ways there are out there that people are actually listening to their stakeholders. So just to remind folks where we are, the key steps of sustainability, and this is like we can all sing along as a chorus at this point. The first thing you want to think about for sustainability is really, what is the long-range goal? What is it that you're sustaining? You want to make sure to carefully assess all the elements that you want to keep continuing that are going to help you to deliver value. You'll have to figure out what it's going to cost during and then beyond the grant to continue this work, at least the pieces you feel are most important. And then the part we've been talking about a lot today, you want to assess the value to your direct and indirect beneficiaries. that this offers. And in yellow, you'll see the first step is just defining the assumptions or things you want, and the next thing is testing them. Next week, or 2 weeks from now, we're going to talk about the role that you play within the wider landscape, and finally looking for all the sources of support. Once we get to the last session, you'll understand that we're going to look at audience plus environment to frame up a really strong value proposition. I'll just remind folks that there's a series of case studies in sustainability that literally walks through what different project leaders have done from the beginning stages when they were just funded to the end when they actually came up with a plan for how they were going to keep going and how they addressed user needs. And these are all available online. I will also briefly mention that I have been running a workshop that is called the Business Model Bootcamp, and we have the next one starting in August. It's a 3-day workshop in Chicago. Many of you in the ATE program are aware that there is also NSF's own I-Core program, which instead of a 3-day intensive spreads this work out over probably 5 or 6 months and actually funds you to participate. So that's definitely something to look into as well. Our last webinar of the season, coming up on Tuesday, May 3rd, is going to be the funding environment, and we're going to take a look at the ocean you swim in with our guest speaker, Mike Lasecki. So Rachel, before we go to our last slide, is there anything you might like to add?
No, it's just been wonderful to have everyone on. I think we probably want to open the survey up if people would be kind enough to fill out the survey, and then while folks are filling out the survey, that looks like it might be opening up. If there are any other questions in that chat window, we can have maybe time for one more answer. Do you see anything, Nancy? I don't see anything that hasn't been covered.
No, but I thought I'd take, as folks are, I'm encouraging folks to answer the survey. I'd love it if actually Marilyn or Tom had any closing thoughts or words of wisdom to share with our attendees.
I have no words of wisdom, but
yeah, sure.
What I say is I know I emailed or I put in the chat box, but I don't know if it came through. There were some questions that I did not get to when I lost my screen. So if those folks would want to email me, that would be great. I think you have my contact information. So that's not words of wisdom. That's just more of making sure I answer folks' questions appropriately.
Okay. So Marilyn, did you have some closing thoughts to share?
Yeah, I just think it's important to make it part of your whole project or organization, whatever you're doing, as early as you can start wrapping your head around it. It's hard to sustain things when you're starting because you might not have anything to sustain yet. But it shouldn't take that long before you realize you're adding value to people's organizations. So, and their infrastructure, and that some of that should be sustained. So start early. That's my thought.
Celeste Carter likes to say from NSF, early and often, which I always think is a good phrase when it comes to sustainability.
Yeah, well, this has been great, and folks are asking a couple of things for further information. So the first thing is just to remind everyone that the recording and the slide deck will be made available on the ATE Central website. And the second thing, someone has asked if we can forward the link to the sustainability programs, the I-Sustainability program. So I'm going to guess that that's some combination of I-Core. It's probably I-Core you're talking about. I-Core, yeah. But I'd be happy if anyone was interested in the short intensive workshop as well. We'll certainly make sure that you have all the information that you need following the session.
And you can just look up I-Core online. It's literally I-CORPS. It's an NSF program. Thanks so much to our guests today. You guys were wonderful. It was great to have you. And Nancy, thank you as always. Mike, I think this may be the formal end to our webinar today.
It is, Rachel, and I just want to make a small comment. On some computers, some Macintoshes, the survey may not open directly. You may have to click on that little box that you may see on your screen and browse to the survey. So I just wanted to mention that for folks. For most computers, it opens automatically in another browser window, but sometimes, depending on the the browser, or the Macintosh in my case, you may have to open it yourself. But friends, we appreciate your participation today. Nancy and Rachel, Tom, Marilyn, really appreciate the information that you gave to us. We look forward to the next one in this series. We look forward to it very much.
Thanks, Mike.
Good.
Thanks,
Friends, that officially ends our webinar today. I'll leave the survey up for a few more minutes so you have a chance to do it. Nancy and Rachel, Tom, and Marilyn, you can just go ahead and shut down your audio systems. And thanks everyone for joining today. Goodbye.